Welcome. We start our programme with a special report inside a territorial dispute in South China Sea. Countries in the region have long argued over territory there, but a recent upsurge in tension has sparked concern that the area is now becoming a flashpoint.
The Spratlys are an island chain situated in a key shipping route surrounding resources. This is how the islands would be divided up between neighboring countries if a 200-mile global exclusion zone is applied.
But China believes this red line, which stretches hundreds of miles from its own coastline, gives it control of the Spratlys. The BBC's Rupert Wingfield-Hayes travelled to the Gavin Reef in the Spratlys, where he found China has a new way of pressing its territorial claim.
On a fishing boat in the middle of the South China Sea, I am on the hunt for the Spratly Islands. I want to find out whether claims that China is building new territory out here are true. Then on the horizon, what looks like land, an island where there shouldn't be one.
On my GPS, and this has the latest software on it, it says elevated house with a mark of a reef. It's very clear that this ahead is not a reef, it's an island, and that island was not there a few months ago.
As we forge closer, the weather closes in. The new island disappears behind a shroud of rain. We plough on south, and the rain gradually clears. After 4 hours, we spot a Vietnamese fishing boat. And then dead ahead, another island. This one even bigger, and it is a hive of activity.
This place behind me here is called Johnson South, and until a few months ago, it was a Chinese-controlled submerged reef. But now, as you can see, it's been transformed into a giant construction site. And this is where the Philippine government thinks China may be building its South China Sea airbase.
These aerial photos show what this place looked like a year ago, and then in February and finally March this year. Millions of tons of material have been pumped into the reef to create new land. Our Filipino captain is shocked by what we've seen. We used to come here all the time to fish, he tells me. Now with all this construction, I think it won't be long till we can't come here anymore. As if on cue, the Chinese start firing flares into the sky, warning us it's time to leave. China claims the entire South China Sea, including all the Spratly Islands. Beneath this vast claim may lie billions of tons of oil and gas. Early next morning, a new silhouette appears on the horizon. A rusting World War II hulk stuck atop another reef. This ancient rust bucket is the Philippine Navy ship Sierra Madre. On board, a tiny garrison of 10 Philippine Marines, all that stands in the way of another Chinese takeover. Just beyond the reef, 2 Chinese ships roam up and down.
The coast of the Philippines is about 120 nautical miles in that direction. The coast of China, on the other hand, is 800 miles in that direction. But those 2 Chinese ships sitting just off the reef behind me are here to enforce Beijing's claim that this submerged reef is actually Chinese territory.
For the last year, the Chinese ships have been blockading the Sierra Madre, trying to stop fresh supplies and wearing down the Marines' morale. Our families are far away, he says, so it's a big sacrifice. Food is limited, and it's difficult to avoid boredom and sadness. While these Philippine Marines live in peril of falling through their own rusting deck, Beijing's ambition to turn this sea into a Chinese lake moves onward almost unopposed. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News, in the Spratly Islands.
Well, with me in the studio is my BBC colleague Bill Hayton, who is also the author of the South China Sea, The Struggle for Power in Asia. Bill, good to see you. What is this all about then? Construction? I mean, how much is this going to make a difference to the dispute as it stands?
Well, legally, strictly speaking, building on something that's underwater makes no difference at all. All of the features that China occupies in the South China, in the Spratly chain, are underwater at high tide naturally. So building extra concrete on the top makes no difference legally. They still don't count as territory in international law. However, practically, if you build a runway next to all this disputed area, it's clear what you're trying to do, and it's clear there's a Chinese intent to dominate this place militarily, and that's why people are getting worried.
Let's just remind our viewers of the area that we're talking about. China take a large claim to a huge part of the South China Sea, as we can see here, surrounded by the Vietnam, Philippines and Malaysia. I mean, what are the other countries, do you think, going to do about this, Bill, with this situation of the construction unfolding?
Well, there isn't really an awful lot they can do. I mean, the Philippines has no real naval power to speak of. It has a few ships, but they're nothing compared to what China has. Vietnam does have more capable ships, but they're not going to risk a shooting war with China, with their biggest trading partner and a huge neighbour to the north. The Americans have made comments criticising it, but they're staying well out of the rights and wrongs of who owns exactly which feature. So at the moment it looks like everyone's going to basically just watch the Chinese do this. I mean, the Vietnamese have got Occupy reefs literally within sight of some of what the Chinese are doing here, and they've known about this for a year, and they haven't been able to think of anything to do to try and stop it.
Rupert ended his report there calling it the Chinese lake, and how this is very much being viewed by China as their part of the world. I mean, is it really seen as that?
Well, I mean, this, I think, there's a lot of things going on here. There's a kind of almost like psychological warfare going on here, that the China wants to be seen to be the dominant power and hopefully scare off all the other countries that are around there. But don't forget, I mean, China in the Spratlys occupies about 8 or 9 features, most of which are, all of which were underwater at high tide. Vietnam occupies 22, the Philippines occupies 9, Malaysia occupies 6 or 7. So it's not as if this is all going China's way. And in fact, China hasn't occupied any new features in the Spratlys. It's made a move on Scarborough Shoal. The last time it actually took over new territory was back in 1988 in the Spratlys, or there was Mischief Reef in 1995. This has been occupied, these pieces of land that are now being built on have been occupied for 26 years, just with little block houses. And what the Chinese are doing now is turning these into substantial islands that could presumably support a naval or an airborne force of some kind to really thrust power down into the south.
Interesting provocation, but not necessarily anything new. OK, Bill, thank you very much for that. Appreciate that. Bill Hayton there. And we will, of course, get more analysis on this in the next edition of Newsday, so stay with us for that.
Thousands